So, Ellen, thank you for joining us to walk us through H 673.
Great. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am here on H 673. As introduced, and I haven't been to this committee yet, I think, this session, so hello again. I handle land use, energy, climate change, and including recreational trails. This bill is pretty short, but it's an act relating to Vermont's outdoor recreation economy. And so section 1, which is on page 2 of the bill, is the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Impact Study. So the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, VOREC, in consultation with the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council and the Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance, shall conduct the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Impact Study, hereinafter the study. So the study shall evaluate the following: the overall statewide economic impact of outdoor recreation, the county level economic impact of outdoor recreation across the state, how the economic impacts are distributed across recreational activities and land ownership, the current carrying costs of outdoor recreation asset stewardship, the return on investment in outdoor recreation in Vermont, the top 3 opportunities for growth in the sector, and recommendations for future investments to maintain and grow Vermont's outdoor recreation economy.
Can I stop you there? Can you tell us what is meant by current carrying costs?
So not specifically, other than that, I know that stewardship of lands does have costs associated with them. And so some of that is related to acquiring the easements and then maintaining any requirements associated with the easements. So that may include specific maintenance of the trails themselves or posting provisions. So there is some costs when you have conserved land and you're stewarding it.
Thank you.
So at the bottom of page 2, the organizations leading the study shall hire a consultant to conduct the economic analysis required. And then on to page 3, the study may include additional data points as identified by VOREC, the Trails and Greenways Council, and the Outdoor Business Alliance, and the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. The study shall also incorporate findings from VOREC's Move Forward Together Vermont planning process. And in fiscal year 2025, the sum of $200,000 is appropriated from the general fund to VOREC to hire the consultant to conduct the economic analysis required for this impact statement. So that's the first part. The second part in section 2 is establishing a new position for the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. So in fiscal year 2025, the sum of $100,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the Department of Forest Parks and Rec for 1 full-time program support specialist whose duties shall be to the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council to administer membership to the Trails and Greenways Council, manage their meetings, activities, operation, and budget, routinely assess the needs of the Vermont Trail stewardship community, develop, manage, and deploy technical assistance resources for the members, and execute the Trails and Greenways Council advisory role to the Agency of Natural Resources as defined in 10 VSA 443. Finally, in section 3 on page 4, there's another appropriation. It's for $50,000 from the general fund to the Department of Forest Parks and Rec for the purpose of hiring a contractor in partnership with the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council to develop a set of universal trail best management practices, also called BMPs. The BMPs shall aggregate existing BMPs from both the department and nonprofit trail stewardship organizations, with the intent that these BMPs being adopted for the Vermont trail system to ensure all public access trails are built and maintained to a high standard. And effective date is July 1, 2024.
Yeah, questions, Representative Letter.
The only thing I think there's a lot of this that's really good. The sort of the only red flag for me is $200,000 for a study. That seems like a lot, and I'm just curious how you came up with that number and what was the justification
I did not come up with a number. It was the stakeholders that contributed to this group requested that. So I don't know if they've specifically looked at what a consultant would charge for this kind of economic impact
Okay.
analysis. It's a pretty long list of things to do. So I think just off the top of my head, the only recent economic impact consultant that I'm aware of was the renewable energy one from last year, I think was somewhere north of $75,000 just for 3 months of work.
Okay.
So depending on the level of detail and how much they have to sort of start with, that could
Okay.
be part of that analysis. But I don't know if you want to hear testimony on, they have like a consultant in mind who typically does this kind of
I'd be
work.
curious to hear more, because that's twice as much as a full-time position with benefits. So I just want to make sure, I don't know, it just seemed like a lot, and I'd like to know more about that cost, if we could.
We have requests to testify in this bill from the stakeholder. I think all the stakeholders who are listed will be coming in to testify. We can ask them that question. I wondered also, sort of related to that, Ellen, is it common, uncommon, not remarkable in any way that the bill language would say shall hire a consultant as opposed to may hire a consultant, or maybe being silent on the issue and leaving it up to the discretion?
It is not unusual if that is the intent. If there's a specific, if you know, for example, that this is really complicated analysis that should be done by a professional, you can put a shall in there. I think the stakeholders requested this. So again, you maybe want to pose that to them. The only other thing on this subject I would flag is that there's no due date for the report. So I don't know if that's because they don't know how long it would take, because it's a pretty substantial, although I'm not an economic analysis person, so I don't know how long this type of work would take, but it seems like a pretty comprehensive study they're looking to do.
The date at the very end of the bill is the effective date for the bill. That's a different thing.
Right. Normally in like study language, it's usually like the first sentence is when the report is due. So just something to consider, because it doesn't, especially when you're hiring a consultant, you'd probably build that into a contract. But if you want to see the report by a specific time, you would want to include that date.
Representative Levitt.
Can you have without a due date for the report? Then, so you're spending 200,000 for the report, which is due in, we don't know yet. But then in fiscal 25, they're also spending 100,000 from the general fund to shoot it over to Parks and Forest Parks and Rec for a support specialist. Does it make sense to have that person in place before the report is done? Or is that something that's concurrent that I'm not quite understanding?
Yeah, I think these are separate issues. So
Okay.
like the study of the part is kind of a big overall economic analysis of outdoor trails in Vermont and different aspects of them. Whereas the position that's being added is specifically to assist the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council, and it lists their duties. So it really is sort of more of a support specialist type role.
Okay.
And you may want to hear from the Trails and Greenways Council. I'm not sure if they currently have any full-time staff.
Oh, okay.
So you may want to hear more about what kind of staff they already currently have. And I think they asked for this. So I think they probably had in mind what they are looking for that person to do.
Okay, thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Ellen, is there already a Vermont trail system in the state
Yes.
that's overseen by FPR?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an unusual system. Currently in statute, after a trail has been constructed, the management group of that trail can apply to be designated as part of the official Vermont trail system. And so it's more of a, after the fact, you can be added to this system. And so I think that's also part of what is going on in section 3 about having a unified set of best management practices. Because that is one of the things the Trails and Greenways Council looks at when someone applies to be part of that system. So I don't think Vermont is affirmatively building trails under the system. I think generally what happens is after a trail has been built, they apply to become part of it.
And then is it a contract essentially? So if you are accepted, then you have to follow FBR's BMPs?
Yes, but I don't know a ton off the top of my head of what is involved in that.
So John,
Yeah, thank you.
other questions about the language? I don't know if you would know this question, Alan, but we'll certainly find out from whoever would know whether any of the dollar amount figures in the bill are in the governor's recommended budget.
I don't know.
And just then more generically, when, for example, on page 3, the appropriation there on line 5, so for those that were looking at it in fiscal year 2025, the sum of 200,000 is appropriated. The reference, so the language just says fiscal year 2025. We've been talking about budgeting and the base budget versus one-time funding. Is this, when there's language in this like a bill, is it making a distinction between base funding versus one-time funding?
So implicitly it is. So this is for a study. So it is a one-time appropriation for the study, so all of the appropriations in this bill are one-time monies coming from the general fund. In section 2, it is also a one-time appropriation, creating a position. But when you create a position, there is an implication that it would need to get added to the base budget in future years after the initial money is spent.
And when you say it's an implication, I think I get what you mean, but how is that just by general, that's the way we do things here, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, generally in appropriation language, you don't necessarily say one-time funding versus base funding. Because what would happen is the year after, when the Department of Forest Parks and Rec presents their budget, it would just go into their general personnel costs.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to understand how that works and that's the way it happens. Just wondering whether it happens that way because we all agree that's a good way for it to happen, or if there's something more that sort of supports or underlies that, it requires that it happen that way. Something in statute, something in a rule, but doesn't really matter for the purposes of this walkthrough. Other questions? John?
I just yesterday had a question about OREC. Is it an interagency group? Does it have like FPR and ACCD people on it, or is it outside?
I believe it's a nonprofit, so I actually don't know the structure of it. The only group I'm familiar with more is the Trails and Greenways Council is a part of the department. I believe the other groups are non-government entities, but I am not an expert on that.
Trails and Greenways is part of FPR?
They're specifically referenced as sort of it's an odd structure. So off the top of my head, honestly, I can't. I'll just stop there.
Once we finish quizzing Ellen, things we can have a little bit of a conversation if we have time, maybe answer some of the questions that have come up, just because we have the bill presenter in the committee and if not today, we'll certainly get back to these questions very soon. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan. Nice to have you. Now talking about exercise.
All right. Well, having said what I just said, does anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions?
Yeah, and I apologize for getting out of that caucus. To Representative O'Brien's point, I mean, you got the Stowe Trails Partnership, you got the Kingdom Trails Partnership. I mean, these organizations raise funds, hire certified and experienced trail builders, maintain and have a budget for these initiatives, and I'm sure in the Mad River Valley, there's some as well. They're all over the state. So your question about the Trails and Greenways Council is a good one. Where do all these, FPR, the only trails they're responsible for are the ones that are in state parks
State
or
forest.
state forests. So
Yeah.
I share that.
Can I would just suggest that it sounds like a lot of these questions are things that would be really easily answered by a lot of the people we have in mind to testify at this bill, so.
Is there anything you want, that you feel like you want to answer right now, or would you rather not?
I would rather just hear from the people who
Okay.
have this information really locked down.
Great.
Yeah.
But yeah, there, to be fair, 3 different acronyms that begin with V with lots of letters. It can be easy to mix them up. Yep. Okay, any other thoughts? Anybody feel differently? Then, all right, let's do that.
Oh, on this, my agenda page, is Council O'Grady still coming in at 1:30?
I think that's what our expectation is. Yeah. Yeah. So we can then be at ease for 10